Good morning. My name is Rachel Allard. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Resonant Link. We're really happy you all could join us this morning for this webinar on strategies to get your medical device to market faster. We're going to hear this morning from a few different panelists from Resonant Link and Cirtec Medical to really look at the full spectrum of what it takes to design, develop, and commercialize medical devices. So thank you again so much for joining us. And without further ado, two housekeeping items, and then we'll dive into introductions. So the first is, this is a Zoom webinar, so we do have the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a bar with just a little Q&A and some little chat bubbles. If you have a question for the panelists, go ahead and drop your question in there, and we'll try to get to as many as possible live. We will follow up with any questions that we aren't able to answer live, because in the last few webinars, we've had so many that we haven't been able to get to all of them. So no worries, your question will get answered, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible live. Secondly, this is being recorded, so you all will get a copy of the recording as well. So no worries if you have to leave partway or whatnot. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's go with Chris, Will, and then Grayson. Please introduce yourselves and your companies to our audience.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Pollock. I am the engineering manager here at Cirtec Medical's Enfield, Connecticut facility. And Enfield, Connecticut specializes in the manufacture of the design and development and manufacture of implantable pulse generators, averaging roughly about 75,000 of those manufactured.
Great. And my name is Will Pitkin. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development here at Cirtec. I've been with the company for just about 10 years, and my background is really in entrepreneurship and medical devices. So appreciate everyone's time today and look forward to the event.
Amazing. And good morning, everyone. I'm Grayson Zuloff. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Resonant Link. Resonant Link is really focused on making our next generation of implantables rechargeable, and we build great wireless power systems to make that a reality. So looking forward to digging in with everyone today and answering the questions and chatting with Chris, Will, and Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourself. And reminder for anyone who just joined, if you have a question, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So Will, let's start with you. So at a high level, can you tell us how Cirtec helps medical device makers get their devices to market faster?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. Yep. So Cirtec, we are, as many of you may or may not know, we're a contract manufacturer. We've been around since 1987, so quite a long time. The division that I support and that I run is our active implantable group. And so I can talk a little bit about what we do within Cirtec that makes us a little unique from other contract manufacturers out there, that allows us to help our partners get to market faster with their innovative devices. So one of the things that's unique about Cirtec is that over the last 7 or 8 years or so, we've been vertically integrating our capabilities, which allows us to really have more control over our cost, the quality, and the timing of components that are used to build your devices. And when you pull that all together, we're able to really maximize the speed, the cost and efficiencies to getting to market, and the quality of the product at the end of the day. That for Cirtec is a really big differentiator in how we work with our partners in getting their products to market.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. Grayson, same question to you. Can you talk about how you help your customers get their devices to market faster?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we love working with partners that are both in market already with commercial devices and are thinking about their next generation or thinking about a new indication that they're going to treat. And also people that are pre-commercial startups, whether it's in the concept phase, whether they're doing early trials, animal studies, whatever that might look like. And really what we're focused on is being the best partner for that power piece of the equation for the wireless charging or wireless power part. So what we've really focused on is two things. One is developing off-the-shelf platforms that people can take and very lightly customize or just use off the shelf for the design for their device. And so those are ready to go. They can get the design, they can get the IP, they can get the test data, and they're ready to rock without having to do this multi-year charging development for their particular device. The second thing that we've done is really build that expertise on the charging side. So a lot of people come to us and they're like, hey, should we build a team internally to understand and build our wireless charging, or should we work with someone externally? And we're ready to go on day one. We have a team of wireless charging experts. We have all of that historical knowledge, and we have a process that allows us to get answers really quickly through a feasibility study 4 weeks, and then get hardware in people's hands in 3-6 months and get them to market much faster than they can building all of those capabilities in-house.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's a couple of things you said, Grayson, I want to circle back to, but first, I want to go over to you, Chris, because Grayson mentioned sort of shortening a multi-year development timeline into, weeks, if not a few months, and kind of sitting from the engineering perspective, you've seen that happen a lot. So I guess help us understand at Cirtec, and then kind of broadly, like, what are some of the things you do to help people shorten that development timeframe?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel. So from a development and design perspective, what Cirtec really excels at here from the engineering perspective is our ability to design for manufacturability. As Will mentioned earlier, we've been making devices here at Cirtec for since 1987, and there's not a shape or a feature or a device that hasn't come across our eyes over that time. So we can be a great partner for you guys in terms of helping you design your device so that it's manufacturable, both that you can get into early design and early studies quickly, but also be able to scale up quickly and easily as you go into production. Things like weld geometries, component design, tolerance stack-up analyses, things that will help you ease into not just small-scale builds for early on studies, but also easily scalable into the future, as well as packaging and sterilization. We have off-the-shelf and platform-style packaging and sterilization capabilities that allow you to get through those types of aging and sterilization studies both quickly and efficiently with much less cost and time.
Awesome. Thank you. And you both, Grayson and Chris, mentioned off the shelf. So let's dive right into that question. So I love answers from all the panelists. Grayson, maybe we can start with you. But what are the benefits of using off the shelf versus custom? And how do you advise customers to know sort of which is right for any given situation?
Yeah, so when we started in the medical device industry, we'd have customers come to us and they'd have very custom use cases and very custom needs. And so we built some of those, worked with a bunch of great partners for that. And then we kind of realized that a lot of the applications and a lot of the use cases were very similar with some small tweaks. And those we really concentrated into 2 buckets. One is devices that are inside an IPG in the body. That might be a pacemaker, that might be a spinal cord stimulator, DBS, sacral nerve, really anything in that neurostimulator category, or a number of other ones. And then the second one was this really high power use case where people are driving pumps inside the body. And so what we found was that at the end of the day, our partners want a trade-off on budget and on time to market with something that is very, very custom for their application and perfectly optimized, and something that they can pull off the shelf and hit that next milestone, whether that's a clinical milestone, a funding milestone, a development milestone, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So we put a lot of effort into forming those platforms so that people can have that choice of, hey, pulling this off the shelf, maybe a little light customization, boom, we hit that milestone and we're on to the next. And or being ready to do a fully optimized ground up solution that is perfect for their application when the time is right.
Super helpful. Thank you. And Will, same question to you, and especially kind of on the advising piece, because you work with so many different customers too, with different types of devices, both implantable and non. How do you advise people not necessarily knowing where to start on what should we go off the shelf, what should we do custom, and do you ever advise them on a mix depending on the need?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think similar to what Grayson was saying, we have a handful of different platform, whether it's devices, whether they're ASICs or full platform systems. Again, opportunities for customers to take advantage of these platforms to help them, as you said, Grayson, move to next milestones quickly and efficiently. We spend a lot of time working with our customers up front, because the reality is these development programs can be 5-7 years in development, and we recognize that in today's environment. So there's you have these milestones of tranches of funding that are required for a lot of our startups who are working with to get that next tranche of money. So leveraging these platforms can really help speed up that process to getting to those milestones, which sometimes can be just life-saving for the company itself. So we do spend a lot of time early on up front saying, hey, can we do it with off-the-shelf or discrete components before going down full development cycles sometimes.
Awesome. And you touch on something I'm hoping also you can touch on, Chris, which is sort of taking existing devices and maybe even replacing custom components with more off the shelf or easier to manufacture components. So can you talk about, sort of from the engineering perspective, how you look at custom versus off the shelf and where those opportunities are maybe for devices that already are on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Cirtec, really that off the shelf starts with our platform system. We've got platform devices, we've got platform packaging, we've got platform sterilization, we've got off the shelf basics, we've got off the shelf leads, we've got every component and system available off the shelf clinician programmers, off the shelf patient portals, right? So we're able to get customers into, as Will said, those milestones and meet those milestones quickly and attain that funding they need to keep moving along in their development life cycle, while at the same time working with them on concurrently on their custom designs and getting them to what their final design might want to look like as they go into the market.
Awesome. And let's stick with you on this thread, because we're going to pivot to manufacturing, because I imagine there are some challenges and roadblocks that you see in the manufacturing phase that maybe kicks devices back to an earlier phase, having to redesign pieces, or maybe just slows the process, or maybe happens down the road once they're already doing trials. So can you talk to us about a few of the more common challenges you see related to manufacturing and sort of advice for companies to avoid them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts with robust design for manufacturability. Working with a partner like Cirtec that has the experience in manufacturing devices at a very large volume for many years, we've seen many instances of where things work and where things don't work. So we're able to kind of point you in the direction of designing the device so that as you go into production, you don't experience those types of pitfalls and roadblocks and speed bumps as you look towards commercialization of your device. So I think for me, what's most important as you look towards development and moving that into production is making sure that you spent the appropriate time and energy up front to design your device so that it is manufacturable and is scalable easily and quickly.
Thanks, that makes sense. And I know earlier when we were kind of preparing for this webinar, COGS came up and costs. So I'm curious, Will, if you can kind of speak to your experience too of some of the manufacturing challenges that almost don't seem like manufacturing challenges, but things that could have been solved during the design, development, or manufacturing process and maybe kind of come up too late and cause that extra cost and time.
For sure. And that's a big area for us, because we recognize that the most all of our customers are going to get for their product, their ASP, is the day they launch, right? And then, subsequent years after, it's eroding ASPs, and we have to do what we can do as a partner to help them maintain their margins and be successful, right? So we're always looking at the bill of materials and saying, what can we do to help reduce this cost, or the labor, or cycle times, scrap rates, things like that. But a big, just to follow up on something Chris was mentioning is, within Cirtec, we have the luxury where we'll have design engineers sitting in the same facility as some of the manufacturing engineers. And they can literally, when they're looking at drawings and design aspects, can get up and walk over to talk to some of their colleagues and say, listen, how does this look from a manufacturing standpoint? If we release, if we ease up on this requirement or something, can this be a stamp part instead of a machine part? And things like that. We can have that quick dialogue to really, in the design process, to make a very manufacturable product in the end at a cost that, meets our customers' needs. Some of the things that we've also seen too is that when you start developing your product with a partner that also that can support you in manufacturing, all the way through high volumes, you save about a year and maybe average about $1 million in transfer costs just to go from a design partner to a manufacturing partner. So again, when you think about costs and timelines, it's super important to think about that stuff up front as well.
That makes sense. Thank you. And Grayson, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think that power management is a piece that, people can get kind of stuck further down the process in manufacturing or after figuring out something that doesn't work, as Chris mentioned. How do you kind of view the manufacturing challenges that you're solving by sort of helping customers and thinking about power management sooner so that those issues are sort of prevented?
Yeah, there's a couple things we do. So the first thing we do is that during that feasibility study that I mentioned earlier, we're looking at cost and we're looking at manufacturability as a piece of the trade-offs that we're evaluating with our partners. So, hey, this one has this performance metric, but it's more difficult to manufacture or higher costs. This one has this performance metric, it's easier to manufacture, lower costs. How does that fit into your business needs, your product goals? And what you're building for our partners to select and really go into it with eyes wide open on how those trade-offs will impact both the performance, the patient experience, and the cost and manufacturability of their device. So we work with them up front. And then as we get into that development piece of the project, Resonant Link doesn't do large scale manufacturing ourselves. So we're bringing in partners like the Cirtec team here early into those conversations, and even maybe doing some of the preclinical builds with a long-term manufacturing partner to make sure those needs are taken care of, to make sure we're ironing out challenges before we're trying to scale for volume. So really for us, like, we want to support our partners from that concept day all the way to commercialization and beyond. And we don't make money until they get to market and are successful. So our goal is to help them get to market successfully, be able to manufacture successfully, and really moving things up and having that history of building systems that work is what seems to be most important for us to iron out those kinks as soon as we can.
Rachel, can I just add a quick follow-up to Grayson's comment? Grayson, you make a great point, and for all your listeners, so very applicable in our space in active implants. Really the form factor of the device is driven by the size of the battery, right, and the power requirements. So today, where everyone's looking for smaller, less invasive surgeries, outpatient, things like that, really figuring out that power piece up front is key to the overall form factor of your device going forward. So really important part to focus on early.
Exactly. Yeah. And we find a lot to that point. Well, that's a big question, is trading off that battery size with the recharge speed, the simulation style, how frequently we're going to need to recharge. And that has huge impacts on device size, on exactly how the implant will work and how it'll be implanted, and the patient experience. So earlier is always better on all of those. I agree.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that. And then I guess past manufacturing, of course, we have the clinical and regulatory phases and all of that, everything else that happens when a device gets taken to market. Obviously, we're talking about solving some of those problems sooner on, but I'm curious if you can dive into a couple of examples. Maybe we'll start with you, Will, of questions you get from your customers and sort of how you help them make sure, testing goes smoothly, trials go smoothly, and that regulatory approval process goes as smoothly as possible.
Sure. I mean, I think from our perspective as a contract manufacturer, we tend to, one of the services we tend to, I would say, it's not an internal service that Cirtec offers, but regulatory strategy and things like that, we typically have our customers drive that piece. However, what we handle internally would be very helpful is that as we're designing their devices, working out materials that we're using, we tend to go back to what we know is sort of tried and true within the industry, right? Just to prevent any red flags down the road with biocompatibility, which is a massive red flag right now for the FDA. Anything with silicones in it is getting heavy scrutiny by the FDA. I've got customers that have spent a year and millions, tens of millions of dollars focusing on biocomp and doing everything upfront to make sure that by the time they get to their submission, they've really checked all the boxes with those silicone requirements. So for us, when it comes to regulatory and getting ready for approvals and things like that, we spend a lot of time, and Chris could probably talk more to this as far as our, within the development process, looking at the number of IQ/OQ type design verification work we do. But from my perspective, it's really like the materials that we're using and what can we do to ensure that like there's no gotchas right before you get to the FDA approval timeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's probably an area that a lot of companies aren't thinking about necessarily when they first come to you. So Chris, Will mentioned, but can you speak to this from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Will kind of hit it on the head, right? Our experience has allowed us many opportunities to find materials that do work and don't work, kind of like designs, right? And we can certainly help customers steer them in the correct direction of what silicones to pick, what epoxies to pick, what titaniums, right? What manufacturing processes they should use, which ones they should stay away from, right? We've been involved in upwards of say 20 devices on the market that we manufacture, and all those devices have gone through biocompatibility. We've seen all the pitfalls and mistakes that have happened in the past, right? So we're really uniquely positioned to help customers make those decisions and drive those material decisions so that they don't have any surprises and concerns as they go into biocompatibility testing, right? And not just that, but things like aging and stability and all those types of studies, right? We've gone through those many times with many customers, and so understand where we can not just help accelerate those types of activities, but ensure there won't be any failures or problems down the road.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Grayson, I'll turn it over to you for the same question, because I don't think people typically think about sort of power management when they're thinking about what they need to maybe get approved.
Yeah, so where we see power management coming in, one is on the electromagnetic compliance piece, so FCC compliance, and making sure that is ironed out and really well known early helps. Because if you get it wrong, it's a full design process to redo to make sure you're under whatever FCC emissions limits the device needs to be targeting. The second piece is on tissue heating, which is obviously a major thing the FDA is looking at for safety, whether that's like a Chem 43 certification or whether that's the 2°C temperature limit. So we work with customers a lot. That's often one of the key first checks that we're doing analytically and experimentally is on SAR limits, on tissue heating limits, and then on electromagnetic emissions limits. And those are the things that we want to make sure we're checking those boxes, whether it's through a gel testing setup, whether it's through a bench setup, whether it's through analysis, whether it's through an EMC lab, or some of the testing that we do internally there. We check all of those and we do the power piece to make sure that we're not going to have things that are really showstoppers when we get to getting the approvals that we need to commercialize.
So that's interesting, because basically what you're saying and connecting the thread between everyone is that, each sort of piece of a medical device should have its own verification and testing, as well as then the full package, all done before kind of the customer is then taking on that submission process, so that really they have that confidence that there's not going to be any surprises down the road.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd go back to just including that, when you are, I guess, for all the attendees, when you're looking at partnering with a design partner, really kind of take a look at the device you have in mind, you tend to bring to market or develop, and find the right partner who's got a lot of experience with those types of devices. We had a situation a couple of years ago where one of the manufacturers came out with a new material that was supposed to be, quote unquote, very like an existing material on the market, but I think it was about $90 less expensive per part. Customer decided to go with it. We found out down the road in production that when you send a constant current through that material, it doesn't perform the same way as what is marketed. And it was a lot of rework and a lot of effort and a lot of money for this company to go back and change out that material, and again, we had a new customer come in the other day who was planning on using that material. And we said, well, is it a constant current device? And they said, yes. We said, we can't do it. They would never have known, right? So my point is, having that partner, that has experience, who's been manufacturing and developing products like this for years is really, really important, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, obviously, both companies, Resonant Link and Cirtec, specialize in the active implantable space. There are others who have more experience in other areas. So I think that's a good note to call out. You also mentioned, and I want to pull on this thread of sort of startups versus established companies, because I think, Grayson, you mentioned earlier, even advising sort of on the team structure and sort of who, what roles and responsibilities are needed to design, develop, and then commercialize a product. So maybe we'll start with you again, Will, but really thinking about startups specifically, since I know we have some listening today, what should a company be thinking about differently if they've never brought a product to market before and they're kind of in that initial phase?
It's a good question. I'm obviously, my background's in entrepreneurship, so I'm very passionate about startups. I feel since I started Cirtec, we were we were about 100 employees. Today we're about 1,600, but a big part of our DNA is the way we support our customers and our startups. Our largest customer today was a startup customer we launched in 2017. And they've just really done very, very well in the market. So we are very, very supportive. We treat every customer the same, with the same level of touch points and attention, whether it's a large OEM or a startup. The key is that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is that it's a partnership, right? It takes a long time to develop these products. It's hard. There's going to be a lot of no product. The scope of the project always changes in development, right? And so having that partner that is honest up front, you've got transparency, culturally you get along with, that's the key, because there will be difficult times, and it's how you get through it together is the most important. And that's from a relationship side. The other side, right, is that for a lot of these startups, and one of the reasons why I love working with startups is that we're all very passionate about getting our products to market. And the startups tend to say, listen, if I fail at this, I'm going to be looking for a job. Whereas some of the larger OEMs, they may have budgets cut or whether they move on to a different project. But the startups are always very, very passionate and very focused on getting that product to market on a timeline and a budget that they can work with. And I think that for those reasons, again, the timeline and the budget, when you're working with your OEM, your partner, or sorry, your contract manufacturer, your partners, having that transparency, whether it's weekly conversations where you're tracking your progress, your Gants to your budget, so you can course correct real time if you need to, is really important, right? Because when you work with a contract manufacturer, we're staffed to support programs as they come in. And if the program stops and for an extended period of time, those resources will tend to get redeployed on other projects, right? So then when that startup gets the funds in, they may not necessarily be available to come back. And you want to keep all of that tribal knowledge together and that team together through the entire project if possible. So those are sort of my comments on sort of startups, which large AM, and what's important.
Thank you. And Chris, let's tack on to that, if you don't mind, with sort of a couple of lessons learned from your experience working with startups. What should they be thinking about from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, I would echo Will's comments that I love working with startups. I love not only from the engineering background, I love working on new and new and cool ideas and new designs and new therapies. That's always key. It keeps us engaged and keeps us just as passionate as our customers about what we're working on. But Will's correct. We're going to treat OEMs and startups the same way. But the truth is, all those OEMs are startups one day, right? And that's no one starts a company and gets huge right away. So I personally love working with startups, about being involved in those early on discussions. I love helping guiding them towards the right decisions and the best best path forward for them to hit their market quickly. And I think from my perspective, we've gone through that process with many customers. We understand what things should come first, what things should come second, what should you focus on early on, what should you focus on later. How do we get through a problem now, right, and fully solve it later on to keep your timeline going, right? So I think startups are always engaging and fun to work with from an engineering perspective, because we get to help guide them towards their end goals.
Awesome, thanks. And I have one quick follow-up question, then I'll turn it over to you, Grayson. But so you're talking about timelines a bit, and I'm curious, do all companies come to you with a timeline in mind, especially a startup, or are you
long, right? So yeah.
So do you help with that process? Or I guess, how do you get a timeline that's accurate, that gets the resources when they need, to your point, Will, but also reflects, the realities of what it's going to take?
Yeah, so I think what's most important for all of our customers, right, is to be honest and upfront about what those timelines are. For example, biocompatibility testing is a long timeline. There's not too much that Cirtec or anyone can do about that timeline, right? But what we can help control is how quickly we can get into that biocompatibility testing. So, I think there are many things that Cirtec can do that can help accelerate your timeline and help you get to market faster. And that's really based on the experience that we have and going through these projects many times so that we understand where you should focus your efforts early on and where you can focus your efforts on other things later on.
Makes sense. All right, Grayson. Oh, sorry, go for it, Will.
Oh, I was just going to add to Chris' comment real quick. So in regards to the timelines, it really, I would say it all goes back to the funding, especially for startups, right? So timeline could be getting through a particular phase or to a milestone versus getting to market, right? And sometimes, and it's just the way that entrepreneurs worked out their funding. Sometimes it's literally just to get to a milestone, to get that next tranche. And when you lay it all out, it may not be the fastest or the most cost efficient way to get a product to market, but it is what it is, right? It keeps the company alive and they get their funding. So you really just, for us, it's working with the customer to say, okay, well, what is that? What do your requirements look like? And how can we develop a plan to meet them?
Awesome. Makes sense. And Grayson, I'm going to turn it over to you for any other lessons learned from working with startups or things that startups specifically should be thinking about before they take their first product to market.
I think we have a lot of the same takeaways with the Cirtec team. It was amazing to work with startups. Do as well. For us, we're spending that time with the startup, just, hey, transparently, like, what are your next milestone goals? When do we need to hit it by? What's budget look like for that? And proactively working with them to help them hit that as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. Like, both startups and OEMs, the ultimate milestone is getting to market with a successful commercial device, but the constraints are way different. And startups definitely can't get there if they don't hit the next milestones on funding or on growth or whatever those might be. So we're just like, it sounds like Cirtec is. We love working with startups, and we're always very, very proactive about understanding how we fit in to hitting their next milestone and delivering for them.
Awesome. Thanks. And then let's take it to the flip side and look at sort of established companies. And Grayson, we'll start with you this time. What are some different lessons learned or different maybe goals that companies have coming to you thinking about their next generation and maybe differently than what they thought about with their first generation? What are some goals and kind of how do you help advise them to get to help them achieve what they want?
Yeah, I think for startups, it's often kind of this binary, like, do we have a successful product that works and is commercially adopted or not, is kind of the early question that they're trying to answer. I think when OEMs come to us, they're in market, big OEMs come to us, they're in market, they have a good sense of where their device is working, where it's not working, where they're losing business to competitors or winning business against competitors. And they typically have a really clear goal in mind when they come to work with us that goes beyond just, hey, we need wireless charging to make this happen. Sometimes it's our competitors charging faster and we want to catch up and leapfrog them. Sometimes it's physicians are reluctant to prescribe our device that's rechargeable because it's so difficult to get it lined up for patients that some of our physicians just want to go with a primary cell device. Sometimes it's a cost down target. Sometimes it's a new indication, but it's always very clear. And so we can, again, just like how we work with startups, we just want to be clear up front with them. Hey, this is what you're trying to accomplish. We do this feasibility study process so that we can tell them exactly how much faster they're going to charge or exactly how much easier it's going to be to align for their patients or whatever the key thing is they're trying to solve. We're typically solving something that they have very clearly in mind from their experience of being in the market in a really, really directed way.
Awesome. Makes sense. Will or Chris, any comments on that and the difference between a device's next generation and how you advise customers versus that very first one?
Will, you want to go? Want me to go?
Yeah, oh yeah, go ahead. You can start us out. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure from an engineering perspective. I approach discussions with a large OEM any different than I approach those with a startup. I think they still have the same goals in the end. They still want to either hit their milestones or go to market with a device that produces a therapy that they desire, made at a high quality with a low amount of scrap and with a short timeline and a small cost, right? And while all those things are typically not possible all at once, I don't think I approach that relationship with an OEM any different than I do a startup. I think they certainly are different in terms of how they operate, the timelines, the amount of funding, the way that they approach their project from a milestone or commercialization perspective. They might be different in those manners, but in terms of engineering, there's really no difference. We're trying to accomplish the same things no matter what.
Yeah, Chris, I would agree. I'd agree with that. It seems, the desired outcomes are pretty similar. I'd approach them the same way.
Awesome. Thank you all. So I had one more question, but we have some audience questions coming in. So I'm actually going to pivot to those. So just a reminder for everyone listening, we do have about 15 minutes or so left for the webinar. So definitely drop in your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen if you have them. So first one, can you please give an overview of the implantable battery landscape? Well, we only have 15 minutes, so maybe not a whole overview because I think that would take more time, but probably all three of you, can you comment on the supply chain risks and development costs of off-the-shelf implantable batteries versus and off-the-shelf rechargeable batteries versus custom, and how can a company mitigate risk of supply chain with respect to batteries? Maybe Grayson, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I can maybe start on the landscape side. I think you have primary cell batteries, rechargeable batteries. There are a handful of companies, maybe 2 or 3, that are really dominant on the rechargeable battery side, and so we primarily work with them. What we do with our partners is they often say, to what Will had said earlier, battery is really important. So when they start looking at a rechargeable device, they'll say, hey, Resonant Link, like, what batteries are you compatible with? The answer to that is any battery. Then they'll say, like, what do you recommend, or what do we need to hit these charge speeds? And we'll refer them to those partners. And so that's kind of how we work at it. There's a couple new technologies coming out that are getting the recharge times down to 5-10 minutes that are really exciting. I think that's the most exciting new technology that we're seeing on the implantable battery market. And then maybe I'll turn it over to Chris and Will to talk about the supply chain side for that.
Yes, so as Grayson mentioned, there's only a couple players in that battery market. So I think from a supply chain perspective, you don't have too many options there. But the good news is all those suppliers do manufacture solid and high quality batteries. So I do think there are some options out there whether you want to go with primary cell or rechargeable. There are off the shelf options that might be acceptable for short term use and to complete things like early studies. And there's always custom options available from those types of vendors that certainly take time to set up and develop and qualify. But that does not mean that you can't do those kinds of things concurrently with an off-the-shelf battery. As Will mentioned before, batteries are a very large driver of the shape and size of your device. So I think that's also a consideration that has to be thought of as to what you want a device, where you want it to fit, where you want it to go inside the human body. But from a supply chain perspective, we've got good relationships with all those vendors. We work with them for years. We purchase thousands of batteries a year from them. And I think that's something that we can certainly help customers with in terms of which vendors to go with, which ones are going to provide you the best timeline, the best cost, and how we're going to integrate that into your design and your device.
Yeah, I follow up with what Chris was saying. I mean, we've got great relationships with the 3 primary suppliers out there. I think over the last and anecdotally from where I sit, there's been a lot of turmoil over the last few years in the battery market. And it's certainly a focus everyone's asking about, how do I minimize my risk? And it's a great question. I actually think the market's ripe for another entrance to come on in and support the implantable battery market. We would certainly support it and look at what we can do to help secure this market. there's a lot of benefits and and drawbacks to the current situation and supply chain with the players, and so we're always looking for new suppliers as well.
Awesome. Thank you all. And I just want to circle back to one piece. This Jack asked about cost, and you touched on this, Chris and Will. I'm curious, maybe for all of you to answer, if a customer isn't sure, a company isn't sure what type of battery they need, are you sometimes putting together multiple designs for them that are kind of like path A, you can reach your $100 cost per unit or whatever the COGS target is with an off the shelf, and this is the design, and path B, you can customize your battery if you want it to be smaller, but the trade-off is X. Like, are you having those conversations with customers, or is it really kind of honing in on the best one to begin with and sort of proceeding with that?
Certainly. I think we have those conversations with pretty much every development program, and present those types of options to customers on a regular basis. We also present options that don't include a battery. I think, technology that Resonant Link is able to provide is opening up a pathway to devices to be more, to be passive as opposed to active devices, right? And a lot of therapies only happen for a few minutes a day, or for 10 or 15 minutes a day, right? And with technology like Resonant Links, what's really stopping customers from putting no battery in the device and changing their profile and making a small implantable device that they're able to turn on for 10 minutes a day and then move on with their life after they're done with their therapy. So we present these types of options to customers, both primary cell, off the shelf, custom battery, no battery. Right? These are all options that we can talk about with customers, help them pick their best path forward.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And so there was another question that came in, and I think you got the wheels turning on biocompatibility with your comments earlier, Chris. So this, William asked, he's working on an optogenetic implant research project, so animal research, and doesn't have a lot of funding, it sounds like, and is curious, what you would suggest in terms of areas to avoid on the biocompatibility piece. How should he go about, choosing the techniques and design that he's going to use, knowing that he doesn't have a lot of funding to change things or go beyond this initial phase, it sounds like.
Yeah, from a biocompatibility standpoint, whether you're doing, electrical stimulation or light stimulation in that optogenetic field, I think, from a material perspective, there really aren't that many options out there, if I'm being honest, right? Most devices are made from the same materials, and have been for decades. And, unless new fancy materials are developed sometime here in the future, I don't really see those materials changing going forward, right? So Cirtec has certainly helped assist you with what direction to go into in terms of materials to use, so that you don't have to worry about things like biocompatibility. But a lot of those biocompatibility questions are kind of, there's not really a one-size-fits-all strategy there for biocompatibility. Every design is different, every therapy is different, every device is different. So while there might be similarities in materials and manufacturing methods to make a device, that material selection is heavily dependent upon what your therapy is and what you're trying to do. For example, for optogenetics, if you're trying to provide that therapy by way of light, you're not going to be able to design a device that's in a titanium can, for example, right? Whereas if you're doing that by electrical stimulation, you certainly can. So, it depends on your device design, and that's going to kind of guide the material selection, what you're going to be able to do going forward.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Are there things, I guess, if someone is at the early stage, sounds like this might be a postdoc project or something academic based, are there things that people can do or resources they can go to start to conceptualize a design before maybe they have the funding to bring on a partner like a Resonant Link or a Cirtec that can really help them crystallize that?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest going out and doing the research from the white paper perspective, right? Looking at what other companies have done in terms of their, intellectual property and how they've achieved similar types of things. Obviously, you can't just go and rip them off, but you can certainly kind of see what other companies have done and the materials they've used and the paths they've taken to achieve their success with their studies and their devices. And that's what I would start, right? That's a common research technique that we use here at Cirtec, right? We come across challenges in development. That's the nature of development itself. And what we do here at Cirtec is we go and do that research, right? We figure out what's worked, what hasn't worked. If we haven't done something before, and we're constantly bringing new capabilities, new technology into our company, right? And that means we got to go out there and learn about it, understand it, and see how other folks have achieved their success.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I will put in a plug we just came back from the International Neuromodulation Society World Congress, and there are a lot of really great events with clinicians and device makers and engineers and, manufacturers all parts of the ecosystem and everyone getting together and very eager to share what they know. So I
Not even
recommend
medical
this.
device, right? There's been plenty of ideas from aerospace and space and automotive that, they had a great idea or a great manufacturing method, and it scalable is scalable and size is size, right? So ideas are all over.
I love that. There was another question about, I think, the custom versus off the shelf, debate really kind of hit a nerve or was of interest. So what about semi-custom? If you make customizations to off the shelf options, does that reduce development timelines? Does that reduce costs? Or is it relatively similar to kind of starting with custom from scratch? And are there benefits to semi-custom? Maybe we can start with you, Grayson, and then go to you, Will.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we see big benefits to going semi-custom versus completely ground up development. I think most med devices need some level of customization. We've seen there's very rarely do we have like a one-to-one. We can just translate a design. So I think we semi-custom, for us, it's about half the time or a quarter of the time versus a ground up design to get to those first prototypes that people can start playing around with. And that translates to similar savings on budget and on time to market. So we see huge benefits to going semi-custom versus completely ground up.
Yeah, and I'd follow up same thing. I mean, just as an example, we acquired IP from which we converted to a platform device that was previously PMA approved on the market for neurostimulation, and that has a complete design history file to it. And so if folks want to go do semi-custom on that product line, on that platform, it can save tremendous amount of time and cost. A typical neurostimulator device from ground up could cost anywhere between 15 to 20 million in 5 to 7 years to develop. When you semi-custom a device like this, you can get to market in 12 to 24 months, at the most, high-end 24 months, and reduce your cost to anywhere from 2 to 2.5 million. So it's a massive. Now you may end up with a device that's larger than you ideally want. Maybe maybe over-engineered, maybe more complex than you need. But if your goal is strictly like get to market, prove the therapy, prove there's demand in the market for that therapy, which quite honestly is a lot of what I'm hearing right now, is that a lot of these big funding opportunities come after you get your PMA approval, because safety and efficacy are just a given, right? That's why we're doing it, but it's demand. And that's when you see a lot more money coming in, where from an investment standpoint, you're not diluting your company with, at this point, you don't have to take that money. And then they're working on their kind of Gen 2, which is a smaller form factor, lower COGS, things like that. That become really more of their, kind of eventual product going forward. But it absolutely semi-custom. I think we have 5 customers today that are leveraging this platform. The original device was for spinal cord stimulation. None of those customers are in the spinal cord stim market. They're all customizing it for their own particular therapy. And so we're a big fan of that. I think it's in today's financials, it's a big advantage to leverage that when you can.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great example, that 2.5 million versus 20. So 10% the total potential costs. Great for people to be thinking about. We got another question, and just a reminder for everyone still listening that you can drop any questions into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all of them live. So we'll go to you first on this one, Grayson, and then Chris and Will. Question about feasibility assessment. And you were kind of talking about this, Grayson, and so maybe you can talk about it from the power perspective, and then Chris and Will from sort of the whole device. But what should companies expect when planning for that initial timeline and cost associated with just planning the development path, just figuring out, is this device or concept even feasible?
Yeah, so we do that through our opportunity study program, which at the end gives you that design trade-offs, gives you that is it feasible or not, and gives you the outlines of that design, budget, and timeline. We do that in 4 to 6 weeks, and it is tens of thousands of dollars. So we like to do it super cheap. 2 PhDs work on full-time on each project. And at the end of that, we, in just a month or a month and a couple weeks, our partners have that full answer. So our goal is to get that as cheap and as quick as possible.
And Will and Chris, do you guys, I would imagine you have a process for sort of feasibility from a whole system design and being able to manufacture it at a certain, COGS and all those pieces. So do you have sort of a feasibility process that you go through with customers that's separate from then going into full design?
Yeah. Chris, you want to start?
Yeah, sure do. And I would kind of echo what Grayson said in terms of cost and timeline. I think most of our feasibility type programs live in that 4 to 6, 4 to 8 type timeline world, and we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, not large amounts of money. And it really, at the end of that process, right, you'll have a proposal with how long it's going to take to develop your project and get to market, and the cost associated with that, and a device that we know is a design that we know is manufacturable and scalable.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, one of the things that I've seen that are incredibly important to these sort of phase zero types of activities is if you can kick that off with the customer having a really good sense of what your user requirements are, right? Because what we'll typically do then is we'll get sort of a bucket of funds we just use towards NRE hours. We'll pull a pretty significant team together, and we always kick it off with a couple-day brainstorming session where we get everything out on the table, and you've got development engineers, process engineers, quality engineers, design engineers, everyone in on these early discussions, and really kind of hit it hard up front. And then, over the next few weeks, basically down select and come up with a really strong sort of phase zero endpoint. But knowing those, my advice, I guess, to these, folks looking to kick off a project is really have a strong understanding of your user requirements, because, that plays into your design, and you don't want to change that once you kick things off, ideally,
Yeah, that's a great point. And probably separating the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves too, so that when there are trade-offs down the line, it makes it easier to make those decisions. Awesome. So we are actually 1 minute until the end of the webinar. So any other questions, feel free to drop them in and we will definitely follow up with you. But I'm going to throw one more question to the panelists. We'll go Grayson, Will, Chris. What is the one last piece of advice or something we didn't talk about that you would definitely give to companies bringing a new device or a next generation device to market?
Yeah, I think to the point of our conversation today, it's that partners like Cirtec, like Resonant Link and others, when used right, can really accelerate that time to market and catch a lot of those pitfalls from our collective historical experience with bringing other devices to market. So I think it's be thoughtful and make sure the right partners for the right parts of the system can make a big difference in getting to market.
Yeah, I would say spend the upfront time really doing your research, finding the right partner, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's, specifically to the type of device that you are, looking to launch and to develop, right? So if it's active implants, find that partner that is got all the resources and capabilities and the history that, in that space, because they're going to be able to provide you the most value. And, most of us contract manufacturers work on a time and material basis. So, you want to be working with the folks that are the most efficient, that have got the experience, they know where the pitfalls are, and then are, like I said earlier, that treat you as a partner and a collaborator, because, at the end of the day, a contract manufacturer is just an extension, of your company. And so that's all got to connect well.
And I think those two have probably stolen all my thunder on this question here, right? I agree completely, right? I think it's important to get your manufacturer involved up front, right? And make sure that they're experienced, that they understand how to make your device, because they're going to be able to provide that guidance and that tribal knowledge and that experience and help you guide your device to where it wants to go.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, Will, Grayson, thank you so much for being here. And to all our attendees, thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye.